One of the scenes filmed for Band of Brothers never made it into the final cut, though it would have added an important layer to Norman Dike's story. In the sequence, Dike was driven away from Foy in a jeep after being relieved of command. As the vehicle passed, the men of Easy Company sat silently in their trucks, watching him leave. Peter O'Meara, who portrayed Dike, recalled having to stare straight ahead as the camera captured the soldiers' cold expressions. The scene underscored the humiliation of the moment, but it was ultimately left out, likely for time. Without it, many viewers assumed Dike died at Foy. In reality, he survived the battle, was reassigned to a desk job, and even received a promotion. O'Meara discussed this, and much more, in a revealing interview about his role as the most controversial officer depicted in the series. In Band of Brothers, Dike first appears in Holland as Easy Company's 5th commanding officer, replacing Lieutenant Frederick Moose Heiliger after Heiliger was accidentally shot by one of his own men. Dike had already been selected for the role before the incident. When he arrived from division headquarters, he made a strong impression. Tall, slim, well-educated, and polished in his military bearing, he looked every bit the part of a capable officer. The series offers little insight into Dike during the Holland campaign, but his real-world record tells a fuller story. Before joining Easy Company, he earned a Bronze Star for his actions near Uden around September 23, 1944. Surrounded by superior enemy forces, he organized scattered paratroopers and led the successful defense of a critical road junction along the Eindhoven to Arnhem supply route. There was nothing in that citation to suggest cowardice or a tendency to avoid responsibility. Dike joined Easy Company in early November 1944, just weeks before the Siege of Bastogne. Although he becomes a central figure in Episode 7 Breaking Point, Stephen Ambrose's Band of Brothers contains relatively little about him. One event portrayed accurately was Carwood Lipton's conversation with Richard Winters, in which Lipton voiced concerns about Dike's leadership. The men's frustration was genuine. That frustration reached its peak on January 13, 1945, during the assault on Foy. According to eyewitness accounts from Winters and Lipton, Dike lost control as the attack stalled under fire. Winters initially grabbed his rifle and started toward the front, intending to relieve him personally, but stopped when he remembered he was now acting battalion commander. Unlike the television version, Colonel Sink did not shout at Winters. Instead, Winters ordered Ronald Spears to take over, and Spears famously sprinted through the German lines to restore momentum to the attack. At the battalion meeting that followed, Colonel Sink asked Winters what he intended to do with Easy Company. Winters answered that Lieutenant Dike would be relieved, and Lieutenant Spears would assume command. Sink approved without hesitation. Lieutenant Foley later wrote that the men were glad to see Dike go. To them, Foxhole Norman had proven he was not meant to lead the company in combat. Yet the picture was more complicated than the nickname suggested. Dike was reportedly wounded during the assault on Foy, a fact omitted from both the book and the series. If true, it may help explain why he froze. Just 10 days earlier, on January 3, 1945, he had earned a second Bronze Star for rescuing 3 wounded soldiers from an exposed position under intense enemy fire during the fighting around Bastogne. Whatever his shortcomings as a battlefield commander, his record showed undeniable courage. Later memoirs were far less charitable. In Beyond Band of Brothers, Winters spoke critically of Dike's performance. William Guarnier and Edward Babe Heffron echoed those views in Brothers in Battle, Best of Friends. His unexplained disappearances, his distance from the enlisted men, and his tendency to stay in his foxhole during combat cemented his poor reputation. The contradictions suggest a man who was brave but unsuited to frontline leadership. Dike was not the first Easy Company commander to struggle in combat. He appears to have been an ambitious officer who accepted command because it was necessary for advancement, not because he excelled at tactical decision-making under fire. After Foy, he was promoted to captain and later served as an aide to General Maxwell Taylor, a path that indicates his superiors continued to value him. It is also possible that Easy Company never fully accepted him. The company's non-commissioned officers had trained together at Camp Toccoa and had already endured Normandy and Holland. Dike arrived as an outsider. Once the veterans formed an opinion, it was difficult to change. Notably, during the stalled attack at Foy, only one soldier was killed before Spears took over. despite the series portraying much heavier losses. Dyke's frequent absences from the front may have been related to his connections at division headquarters, where many of his closest associates served. Whether the personal conversation with Lipton shown in the series actually occurred is unknown, but if it did, it suggests Dyke was making an effort to understand the men he commanded. His post-war life received no mention in the series, though it added important context. After the war, Dyke earned a law degree from Yale University and retired from the Army as a lieutenant colonel. Some accounts indicate he also served during the Korean War. He died in Switzerland in 1989 at the age of 71. For Peter O'Meara, being cast as Norman Dyke was initially disappointing. When he received the role, he knew almost nothing about the man. After reading the scripts, he realized he would not be portraying a heroic figure charging into battle, but rather the officer blamed for one of Easy Company's darkest moments. He even asked to attend the cast's boot camp, hoping to immerse himself alongside the other actors, but was denied because Dyke was a replacement officer, just as he had been in real life. The rejection mirrored the character's place within the story. While actors such as Damian Lewis and Matthew Settle had developed close bonds during training, O'Meara arrived later and felt like an outsider. That isolation ultimately helped him understand Dyke. He came to see the role as a larger responsibility, to portray a man who was disliked, misunderstood, and remembered chiefly for one catastrophic failure. On his first day, military advisor Captain Dale Dye made the assignment clear. "You're an asshole, Dyke," he told him bluntly. O'Meara did not want to reduce the character to a caricature. Instead, he tried to present Dyke as a flawed human being, a man who wanted to be brave and successful, but found himself in circumstances beyond his abilities. Because Dyke was long deceased and his family was not consulted, O'Meara relied on the scripts and his own instincts. He adhered closely to the dialogue but shaped the silences, the awkwardness, and the sense of detachment that defined the character on screen. How closely that matched the real Norman Dyke, he could never know. When O'Meara met the veterans, he feared they would resent him for representing painful memories. Instead, Richard Winters greeted him warmly, put an arm around him, and told him he had done a great job. The gesture nearly moved the actor to tears. Most of the veterans were welcoming, though one remarked that Dyke wasn't as bad as you made him out to be. That comment captured the enduring ambiguity surrounding Norman Dyke. The dramatic needs of Band of Brothers turned him into the embodiment of failed leadership, but the historical record reveals a more nuanced figure, a decorated officer who performed acts of genuine bravery, struggled under the weight of combat command, and spent the rest of his life carrying a reputation shaped by one disastrous day in the snow outside Foy.